Journal entry number 13. The turning point. I used to imagine that change began with a decision. A person wakes up one morning, looks at their life and says, "That is enough. From today onward, everything will be different." Then the music rises. They clean the room, they make a plan, they buy the notebook. And by the end of the week, they have somehow become a completely new person. It is a satisfying picture. Unfortunately, I have bought enough notebooks to know that it does not always work that way. A decision can begin something, but a decision is not always a turning point. Sometimes it is only a temporary interruption in an old pattern. We feel strongly for a few hours, perhaps a few days. Then the feeling fades, the old routine returns, and we quietly become the person we were before. That has happened to me more than once. I have made plans that felt important while I was writing them. I have promised myself that this time would be different. I have rearranged schedules, created systems, and imagined the future waiting on the other side of my new routine. But somewhere between the intention and the repetition, I returned to familiar ground. Nothing dramatic happened. I did not announce that I was giving up. I simply stopped moving. And sometimes, I did not even notice. This makes me wonder, what actually causes a person to change? Not temporarily, not because someone is watching, not because the first burst of motivation is still carrying them. What makes change reach deeply enough that returning to the old way begins to feel more uncomfortable than moving forward? Perhaps lasting change does not begin when we make a plan. Perhaps it begins when something inside us can no longer remain arranged in the same way. There is a concept in psychology called cognitive dissonance. It describes the discomfort we experience when our beliefs, values, and actions do not agree with one another. We may believe that health matters while repeatedly neglecting our health. We may value learning while continually avoiding the difficult work of learning. We may say that a project is important while giving it whatever time remains after everything else. Each contradiction creates a small tension. Usually, we find a way to live with it. We explain it, we delay it, we say we are too busy. We tell ourselves that next week will be quieter. Sometimes these explanations are true. Life does interrupt us. Responsibilities are real. Energy is limited. But explanations can also become cushions. They soften the discomfort just enough for us to remain where we are. The contradiction continues, but it no longer hurts enough to demand a response. Until one day, perhaps it does. Perhaps we hear ourselves repeat the same excuse and no longer believe it. Perhaps we see another month disappear. Perhaps we look at something unfinished and realize that the problem is no longer a lack of time. The problem is that our behavior has been voting for a life different from the one we claim to want. That realization can be painful. But pain is not always the enemy of change. Sometimes it is evidence that the distance between our values and our actions has finally become visible. There is another idea called self-discrepancy. It concerns the distance between different versions of ourselves. There is the person we believe we are, the person we think we should be, and the person we hope to become. When those versions move too far apart, we may feel disappointment, guilt, frustration, or even shame. I know that distance. There are moments when I can see quite clearly the person I would like to become. She is disciplined. She finishes what she begins. She protects time for meaningful work. She does not need to be rescued by a sudden wave of motivation. She simply returns to what matters. Then I compare that image with what I actually did during the day. The comparison is not always flattering. It is tempting in those moments to turn self-awareness into self-punishment, to call ourselves lazy, weak, undisciplined, perhaps even incapable of change. But I am beginning to think that shame does not always help us cross the distance. Sometimes it only makes us afraid to look at it. If every honest examination ends in an attack on ourselves, we eventually stop examining. We avoid the evidence. We hide from unfinished work. We choose distraction because distraction does not ask difficult questions. So perhaps a turning point requires honesty without cruelty. The ability to say, "This is where I am. This is where I hoped to be. And these are not the same place." Not as a verdict, as a coordinate. Because we cannot change our direction if we refuse to identify our location. There is a theory of adult learning called transformative learning, associated with Jack Mezirow. It suggests that some of our deepest learning happens when an experience disrupts the assumptions through which we understand ourselves and the world. Something no longer fits. An old explanation stops working. A belief that once seemed reliable becomes insufficient. Mezirow described this kind of disruption as a disorienting dilemma. It may be a major event, a failure, a loss, a new responsibility, a confrontation with something we can no longer ignore. But I do not think every turning point arrives as a dramatic crisis. Sometimes the dilemma is quiet. It is the slow recognition that the way we have been living cannot produce the future we keep imagining. Nothing explodes. No door slams. The room simply becomes too small for the person we are trying to become. That may be why turning points are difficult to recognize while they are happening. They do not always feel powerful. Sometimes they feel like confusion, restlessness, dissatisfaction. The growing inability to accept an answer that used to satisfy us. We may think we are losing direction when, in fact, our old direction has stopped making sense. Transformative learning is not merely adding new information to what we already know. It can involve questioning the frame itself. Not only asking, "What should I do?" but, "Why do I keep approaching my life this way? What assumption is guiding me? Is that assumption still true? Perhaps I believe I must feel ready before I begin. Perhaps I believe meaningful work requires a perfect stretch of uninterrupted time. Perhaps I believe that one failed attempt proves I lack discipline. Perhaps I believe change should be smooth if it is genuine." These assumptions rarely introduce themselves. They operate quietly beneath our choices. We do not see the rule. We only keep living according to it. A turning point may begin when the hidden rule becomes visible, and once we can see it, we can question it. But insight alone is not transformation. I have understood many things that I did not immediately change. Sometimes I have understood them very elegantly. I could explain the problem, describe the pattern, possibly make a diagram, and then continue doing exactly the same thing. The mind can become highly skilled at producing explanations, while the body preserves the routine. So the turning point cannot remain only an idea. It needs an action. Not necessarily a grand action. Perhaps the first action is deliberately small, opening the document, walking for 10 minutes, removing one distraction, returning one phone call, completing the next visible step. The action matters because it gives the new understanding somewhere to live. Without action, insight remains a visitor. It arrives, says something profound, and leaves before breakfast. But when we act, even imperfectly, we begin producing evidence. Evidence that another response is possible. Evidence that the old pattern is not inevitable. evidence that the person we hope to become is not entirely imaginary. She has already appeared in one choice, then perhaps another. I once thought a turning point would divide life neatly into before and after. Before the decision, I struggled. After the decision, I changed. But real life seems less obedient. We may reach a turning point and still hesitate. We may understand what must change and still return to an old habit. We may take 3 steps forward and 1 step back. That does not necessarily mean the turning point was false. Perhaps transformation is not proven by never struggling again. Perhaps it is proven by the fact that the struggle now means something different. Before the turning point, we may not see the pattern. Afterward, we recognize it. Before, we drift without knowing. Afterward, drifting creates a signal. Before, we abandon the path. Afterward, we learn to return. The old behavior may still be available. It may even remain attractive, but it no longer feels neutral. We now know where it leads, and knowing changes the choice, even when it does not make the choice easy. Maybe this is why some changes cannot be forced from the outside. Advice can help, a book can help, a conversation can help, a consequence can certainly help, but other people cannot complete the internal turn for us. They can point toward the contradiction, they can ask the question, they can hold up the mirror. But eventually, we must decide whether we are willing to look. And looking honestly may require us to release a familiar story about ourselves. The story that we are waiting for the right time. The story that circumstances are the only thing holding us back. The story that we have already tried everything. The story that this is simply who we are. Some of these stories may have protected us. They may have helped us make sense of disappointment. They may contain real difficulties and real history. But a story can explain our past without being allowed to govern our future. Perhaps the turning point arrives when we stop asking the old story for permission. I do not think we can manufacture every turning point. Some understandings need time. Some truths have to visit us more than once before we are ready to receive them. But we can create conditions for honesty. We can pause long enough to notice what keeps repeating. We can compare what we say matters with where our time and attention actually go. We can examine the discomfort instead of immediately silencing it. We can ask whether our frustration is merely an obstacle or a message. And when something becomes clear, we can give that clarity a small action before the moment passes. Not a complete reinvention, just a vote for a different direction. Perhaps that is all a turning point needs at first. A moment of honest recognition. A decision not to look away. And one action that makes returning to the old story slightly less automatic. We often wait for change to feel inspiring. But perhaps the real turning point is quieter. It is the moment when we can no longer pretend not to know. We know what the pattern costs. We know what we have been avoiding. We know that the future we want cannot be built entirely from the habits we keep defending. Nothing outside us may have changed yet. The same work remains. The same limitations remain. The same uncertain road remains. But our relationship with them has shifted. We are no longer standing in exactly the same direction. And sometimes, 1 degree of inner movement is enough to change where a long journey eventually leads. So here is the question I want to leave with you. Is there something in your life that you keep saying you want to change, but some part of you has not yet truly turned toward it? And what is one honest action that would show you that the turn has begun? That's today's entry. Until the next page, stay curious.